Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our live coverage of the latest operation from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. So good to be with you here on this Thursday, October 30th. We are broadcasting, as we always do, from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. Right now, we are keeping tabs on Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, which, as those of you who've been following along on Launchpad Live have seen, has been upright and loading propellant on board the booster and the upper stage in anticipation of a planned static fire test later on this evening. There are a number of uncertainties with this, given that A, this is just the second time that Blue Origin will conduct a static fire of its fully integrated rocket at Launch Complex 36, and that we don't have a firm T0. Those of you who may recall the previous static fire test campaign last year recall that there were a couple of multi-hour tanking operations that resulted in no static fire, and then we saw it on I believe it was the fourth tanking operation. So we're standing by in the hopes that Blue Origin has got things in a good situation here tonight, and we'll see static fire with those 7 BE4 engines lighting things up for a brief duration, just a few seconds, maybe about 10 or so in total. As we're getting going here, we'll remind you throughout the course of this live stream, but if you see some folks asking about it in the chat, if they're not paying attention to the graphic on screen, just remind them that this is a static fire test, not a launch. So if everything goes to plan, the New Glenn rocket should stay right put where it is. That being said, we're grateful to the 900 plus of you who are watching along with us live tonight. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing some more folks to find their way into this live static fire coverage. I also want to thank our mods in the chat for holding it down for us in this live stream we've got here going tonight. Thanks to Astro Joe and to Rick Donner. You can help make the mod's job that much easier just by following the rules of the live chat. We ask that you post your message in English so that the mods can respond as appropriate. Also, that you hold off from delving into overt politics or religion, and don't post in all caps. Emojis are perfectly fine. We just ask that you don't put a huge block of them in the live chat so that other people can see their messages and read that from others. And last but certainly not least, we ask that you treat each other with the kindness and respect that you yourself would like to be treated. Of course, we'll get along swimmingly at that point. Also want to thank one of our channel members, Cumulus Granatus, for being in the chat with us today to help answer folks' questions as well. Speaking of our channel member community, they are the ones who, on an ongoing basis, support what we do here at Spaceflight Now and keep us going with this and every other live launch opportunity. So thanks to folks like Janine, to Norman Reitzel, Craig R.S., Joni, DB, Sulfur for Lunch, Jamie Setchell, JJ, Rita Loy, and many, many others. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com. Access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course, the ability to watch all of our live launch and, in this case, static fire moments from here in Florida in 4K. Want to welcome in new channel member Kevin Delaney, joining us in membership at the PAD leader level. Welcome aboard, Kevin. Glad to have you with us. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings-on in the realm of space or spaceflight, or just want to offer a little bit of support this evening, you can follow in the lead of folks like K2 Hat and use the YouTube Super Chat feature Not only will he be giving us some interesting things to talk about as we cruise on through the count tonight, but you'll also be supporting what we do here at Spaceflight Now, and that, my friends, is always greatly appreciated. Speaking of, thanks to K2 Hat for a $2 super chat saying hello from Miko, Florida. Also, thanks to Janine for a $2 super chat as well, saying go Blue Origin. Hope the test goes well. Hearing some of the waterfowl of the Banana River as we're continuing to watch things over at Launch Complex 36. Blue Origin is in the flow of testing its New Glenn rocket, one of the big final steps before it begins its true launch campaign. The flight of the NG-2 mission from Blue Origin's side. From the NASA side of things, on board this New Glenn will be a pair of spacecraft that are bound for Mars to study its atmosphere and the impacts from solar wind. So this is a Helios physics mission from NASA that's going to send a pair of spacecraft that were manufactured by Rocket Lab at their Long Beach, California facility, with science instruments on board from UC Berkeley. And in fact, it's thanks to the Berkeley ties that those two satellites got their nicknames. They're twin satellites, with one being named Gold, the other Blue, college colors for UC Berkeley. As far as things are concerned with this New Glenn static fire, one of the big visual signs that we're going to be looking for is if you gaze up towards the top half of the rocket, and you see just above the inner stage, where you see a little bit of venting happening there. Once that venting really cuts off or tapers off, it's based off of the first launch of New Glenn earlier this year. It was right about 2-ish minutes before the water suppression system kicked on. Blue Origin has a 4-minute terminal count, but that'll be a good visual indication since, given that this is a static fire test, we unfortunately are not looped into mission audio from Blue Origin. So again, things are going to be very fluid throughout the course of tonight, and I wish I could say that we could promise a static fire by the end of this broadcast, but this is just the second time that Blue Origin is in the flow with one of its New Glenn rockets, and so things are still very much being worked out. All part of the process of bringing a new orbital class vehicle to the marketplace. As we're getting going here, I want to thank our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of the broadcast tonight. Also, big thanks to our photographers who have been hard at work making sure everything's set up for this static fire attempt. We've seen that helicopter go back and forth a number of times throughout the course of this afternoon into the evening. If you're not following our photography crew, you can find them at their handles here on X. Adam Bernstein is at ABurnNYC. John Pisani is at John Pisani Photo. And Michael Kane is at MD Kane Jr. Also, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now. We are also on Threads, Blue Sky, and Facebook if you yourself are not on X. We're also joined with Static Fire watching by our friends Pete Karstens, or excuse me, by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs, excuse me, with C&J Images. Big thanks to Chuck and Jen for being with us tonight. Of course, as far as upcoming launch coverage, the next one on the schedule that we'll be hosting a live stream for is going to be the launch of the Starlink 11-23 mission, lifting off from Vandenberg Space Force Base tomorrow afternoon. The window opening at 12:44 p.m. Pacific, 3:44 p.m. Eastern, 19:44 UTC. And as a reminder, we're coming right up to the point where you need to set those clocks back. Might as well go ahead and do it Friday night before you go to bed, since by the time we hit 2 a.m. Eastern, that's when the clocks will actually pivot back to 1 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. That'll, of course, still be 0600 UTC at that point. Taking a peek back at our live chat, want to thank Kevin Delaney for a $5 super chat saying enjoying the sights and sounds from Satellite Beach. Appreciate that. Also, Beverly Knuckles, thanks for being a member with us at the mission specialist level for now 16 months, who's joining us watching this test from the British Virgin Islands. DB marking 3 months with us as a channel member at the pad leader level, saying thanks to all the Spaceflight Now crew, mods, / the help for these live streams. And thanks again to K2 Hat for a $5 super chat and some kind words, saying thanks, Will, for the awesome audio, and to all who work so hard for the coverage again, better than watching TV. Well, we certainly appreciate you tuning in tonight, as hopefully we will get a static fire test by the time all is said and done, and this won't be just a wet dress rehearsal. Given that we don't have a firm T0 time for this static fire test, we're just going to go ahead based on local time here. So just about quarter past the hour, 7:16 or so here on the East Coast. It's been a busy month getting things in flow for Blue Origin as they were launching their New Shepard rocket from out in West Texas. They were also in the midst of transporting the booster with the name Never Tell Me the Odds from their rocket factory over near the Kennedy Space Center visitor complex and bringing it out to Launch Complex 36. Taking a look at some of the videos shared by Blue Origin of the initial exodus of the booster that's going to be powering this second flight of a fully integrated New Glenn rocket. As you can see, this is back on October 8th again at the same time as the New Shepard NS-36 launch. can see the visitor complex in the top of the frame there as the booster was making its way out to the main road. This a couple days later, video shared before the integration of the first and second stages, or the mating of the two. And Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp shared this really nice video of them hoisting the fully integrated rocket up over the Pathfinder vehicle, which is still out of the hangar there. Very tight coordination here at the hangar as teams were preparing to bring the rocket out to the launch pad. And then just yesterday, they brought the rocket into a vertical orientation in preparation for what will hopefully be the static fire coming up here in the next little bit. As noted when he posted that video of the lift from the horizontal into the vertical position, is from Blue Origin CEO Dave Limp. The transporter erector brings the rocket from the horizontal position up to about 74 degrees. At about 89.5 degrees, they pause for a final check and then will pin the transporter erector in place using clamps on the launch table that mate to the aft launch ring. Once the checkouts are complete, then they proceed towards the hot fire, which is where we are today. Hopefully, coming up here later on tonight. Again, we don't have a firm T0 to share with you. This is still a fluid operation. But what we really want to watch for is the conclusion of the venting from the rocket's upper stage. just about 7:23 here on the East Coast as we're continuing to track the progress of this New Glenn rocket, preparing for a static fire test of the 7BE4 engines at the base of GS1 or Glenn Stage 1. Again, this is just a static fire test, but to give a little bit of a precursor of what we'll see in, of course, approximation on launch day. I want to share with you this animation from Blue Origin, giving us a look at what things will be like approximately on the day of launch. Again, this is a mission carrying a pair of satellites for NASA's EscaPADE mission. The final of the heliophysics program that's set to launch this year. Once we get a little bit closer to the launch date itself, we will hopefully get a more specific timeline on all these milestones you're going to see regarding liftoff, MECO stage separation, all the nominal events that we're expecting to see with the flight of New Glenn rocket. It's a big rocket doing a lot of important lifting for those small satellites. Of course, EscaPADE was originally going to be the first mission aboard a New Glenn rocket, but in order to give Blue Origin more time to ready their launch vehicle, the decision was made to punt the launch of EscaPADE, and instead Blue Origin flew a Pathfinder for their Blue Ring, which, while not deploying from the Glenn upper stage or GS2, did get a lot of important information and data as Blue Origin looks to bring that payload hosting spacecraft online in the future. As with the first launch of a New Glenn rocket, Blue Origin is intending to try to recover the first stage booster. So, if all goes well, we should see something like this. Obviously, not in rendered form. This is an animation that we're looking at right now. But as GS2 continues on with the two EscaPADE spacecraft, Blue and Gold, the first stage booster will perform a flip maneuver and then target a touchdown on the recovery vessel named Jacqueline, named after Blue Origin founder Jeff Bezos' mother. So if all goes well, we'll see a similar sight to that with the real Jacqueline and the real booster, which this time is called Never Tell Me the Odds. A nice hat tip to the Star Wars franchise. Just now at the bottom of the hour here on the East Coast, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. You're watching live coverage of Blue Origin's static fire test, if all goes well, of its New Glenn rocket, the second orbital flight for this program coming up in the days ahead. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight now. Of course, I say the days ahead, that's not exactly firmed up. Of course, they need to successfully get through this static fire test campaign and then do their final checkouts before proceeding towards the launch of the EscaPADE mission, otherwise referred to as NG2. While there are payload fairings at the top of this New Glenn rocket stack, presumably there isn't actually a payload on board right now. And after the static fire test, the New Glenn first and second stages will together be rolled back into the hangar there at LC-36. The actual EscaPADE payload will be integrated onto the top of the rocket, and then they will roll back out to the pad, bring the rocket into the launch position that we're seeing here, and then get into the final flow for that mission. Again, TBD on exactly when launch of this will happen. Presumably in the next couple to a few weeks, barring something super off color with the static fire here, or a ground systems issue that requires a little bit more work. Taking a quick look at our live chat here, I want to thank the more than 1,100 of you who are watching along with us live tonight. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream, allowing more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. just to address a question from Infamous Eagle asking if I play a role in the video game Star Citizen. No, unfortunately, I've not done any formal voiceover work as far as video game franchises are concerned. Cumulus is right in saying that I did have about a 10-year career in local news, including stations here in Florida, specifically Spectrum News 13, before I joined the ace team at Spaceflight now. That said, my brother is a voice actor, Isaac Robinson Smith. He actually just, well, not just lent his voice, but lent his voice to a video game that just came out with a space connection called Outer Worlds 2. Not official endorsement, but if you'd like to check out his work, you can find his vocal talents there, among a number of other places. Time now just about 7:40 p.m. Eastern here. So we're continuing to track the progress of this New Glenn rocket towards what will hopefully be a static fire coming up here tonight. As we're awaiting this important test for Blue Origin, they are also, of course, working on a number of other things, including their upcoming moon-bound ventures through their Blue Moon robotic landers. Mark 1 is their cargo variant, a smaller iteration of their lander design. And the Mark 2 is designed to be the crew variant of the lander, which will be capable of bringing humans down to the surface of the moon and back up to the gateway in lunar orbit on the Artemis 5 mission. Earlier this week, up in Huntsville, Alabama, the American Astronautical Society hosted the 2025 Von Braun Space Exploration Symposium. One of those panels featured Blue Origins and a discussion about the Artemis 3 mission and beyond, looking at the sustained presence that the Artemis program is hoping to establish. So I want to play you a clip from that. This is obviously germane to Blue Origin's piece of the pie. This is Jackie Cortese, the Senior Director of Civil Space for Blue Origin.
In lunar permanence, we are doing a range of lunar lander capabilities as well as enabling technologies for sustainable deep space exploration. So on the former chart before this, which you would have seen, was our lander family. So the name of our landers are all Blue Moon something. So the first Blue Moon is called Blue Moon Mark 1. It's a 3,000 kilogram class lander. It's a straight to the moon on a single launch, no refueling required, and it's fully powered by LOX hydrogen. So this is a theme you're gonna see through the history of Blue Origin is we have sought throughout the history of the company to develop a deep expertise with LOX hydrogen as propellants. We all know the benefits of them, but we also all know the persnicketyness of LOX hydrogen. So we have at Blue Origin worked to really mature these capabilities through our new Shepard suborbital vehicle that many of you have hopefully seen, the upper stage of our New Glenn orbital launch vehicle, and then that carries all the way through our deep space exploration capabilities. So cool thing about Blue Moon Mark 1, if you did not know, is it is in final stacking right now at our dedicated Mark 1 production plant in Port Canaveral. So we have fully self-funded the first mission of Mark 1, and that is headed to the moon here in the next couple of weeks. So a big milestone for you to look out for online is that Mark 1 is 3 modules that are being stacked as we speak, aft, forward, and mid. And once it is stacked in its finished configuration, we will be barging it over to NASA Johnson Space Center Chamber A to do a full-up thermal vac campaign. So when you see that on its boat, you will know that big things are happening. So we're very excited to have that mission. And then as well on Mark 1, I will say we have a second Mark 1 in assembly in that same plant in Port Canaveral. So a lot of people don't know that the aft structure of the second Mark 1 is actually in structural testing right now. So 2 Mark 1s in that dedicated plant. And a lot of people ask, well, is Mark 1 just for demonstration? Like, are you just trying to prove out BE7 and your other key components for your human landing system work? Great question. But no, we do intend for Mark 1 to be a product line. So that first Mark 1 is, intentionally not carrying 3,000 kilograms of payload because it is a demo flight, right? It is censored. So many instruments, so many sensors, PSI instrumentation with NASA, et cetera. But that vehicle itself is intended to grow into a production line, and we recently were awarded the Viper mission in partnership with NASA for that second Mark 1. So very excited about Mark 1, not just as a test bed for what we're doing on HLS, but as its future for logistics, infrastructure, and big permanence on the moon. So very excited about Mark 1, so stay tuned for the boat. Boat's a big moment, so hang in there for that. And if we were back on the previous chart, you would see our Mark II lander. Oh, thank you. Yes. Our Mark II lander is our crewed lander for the Artemis 5 human landing system mission in partnership with NASA. And as you can see, Mark 1 in and of itself is a large lander, larger than the Apollo lunar module. But Mark II is even bigger, about double the size of that. And for the Artemis 5 demonstration mission, we'll be carrying 2 crew on that lander. And to quickly touch on the ConOps for that before I go to the exciting next charts that you haven't seen yet, that ConOp is, that second stage of New Glenn I mentioned to you all earlier is a LOX hydrogen stage, right? So what that does is it provides propellant to a vehicle called the transporter, which is tanks, a cryocooler, and more of those BE7 engines that you've seen multiple times now. So that transporter vehicle keeps these propellants cryo-cooled, and it fuels the Mark II lander. So that architecture is our Artemis 5 architecture to meet those sustainable NASA requirements that we bid to for the Artemis 5 mission. So you might be saying in your head, which would be fine, well, hydrogen's hard, cryocooling's hard, and propellant transfer is hard. Understood. But that is why we've been working super hard on it. So if we go to the next chart, we won't dwindle here. But one cool thing about the BE7 video that you're seeing here, you've seen it multiple times, but just to comment on it, that's a 17-minute BE7 test, which is the apogee raise maneuver for the Mark I mission. So we actually have BE7 hardware currently on 4 test stands, one here at NASA Marshall, 2 out in West Texas, and 1 at our vacuum test stand in Edwards Air Force Base in California. So BE7 is powering along here, and as you heard, it's the core of everything we're doing in lunar. So great progress there. And then on to the next chart. Thank you. Cryocooling, very important. So Blue Origin has been working to mature our cryocooling capabilities over the last several years, and we're now holding with proto-flight hardware 90 and 20 Kelvin in lab environments, and we have some big upcoming milestones for that. So we worked with NASA super hard this summer on this test campaign that's pictured here. So making hydrogen and oxygen storable propellants, we're making big progress here with this cryocooling technology. And then last chart, and then I promise I'm done. What you're seeing here is the Blue Origin utility transfer mechanism test at Test Stand 300 in partnership with NASA Marshall. So you're hearing a lot of NASA Marshall Blue Origin collaboration. We're big Huntsville fans. Talk to me about it afterwards. I'm obsessed with Huntsville. And what you're seeing here is that test in Test Stand 300 exceeding all of our expectations from a propellant transfer expectation standpoint. So great work with NASA Marshall, big work underway on all of these sustainable capabilities. I think we can all agree that cryocooling and propellant transfer is definitely the future of sustainable spaceflight. So we're hard at work on it for Artemis 5 and beyond.
And again, that was Blue Origin's Jackie Cortese, the Senior Director of Civil Space for the company. We're about 10 minutes to the top of the hour here as we're continuing to monitor things with Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket, standing tall at Launch Complex 36 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. Been in the process of tanking and preparing for what will hopefully be a static fire test for the better part of the late afternoon, now into the early evening. Sunset was just a little more than an hour ago, and one of the visual cues that we're going to be looking keenly for is the conclusion of the venting that you're seeing just above the inner stage. You can see that vapor coming off to the left side of the transporter erector. During the New Glenn 1 mission launch, we saw that venting stop just about roughly 2 minutes ahead of the activation of the water deluge system. So assuming that that part of the timing hasn't been adjusted too dramatically, that'll be a good visual indication that teams are within the 4-minute terminal count and that they are hopefully just moments away from the actual static fire itself. It does appear as though the venting at the second stage, well, it did stop. Now it's picked back up again. Keeping a close eye on that as a signal for the activation forthcoming of the water deluge system. For those of you who may just be joining us, you're watching Spaceflight Now's live coverage of the fueling, which will hopefully result in a static fire test fairly soon for Blue Origin's New Glenn rocket. There's not a firm T0 for this mission, but some of the visual indications suggest that we are certainly getting close. Again, you're going to want to watch for the venting just above the inner stage to stop. And once that does, it's about 2 minutes after that that we see the water deluge system activate. So things will start to happen very quickly, assuming that Blue Origin teams are in a good position to reach that final terminal count and don't need to push back a little bit further. And again, as our moderator is reminding folks in the chat, Rick Donner, thank you for that. Yes, this is a static fire test, just a static fire test now. The rocket, as intended, will stay affixed to the pad with those hold down clamps, preventing it from going anywhere during this hot fire of the 7 BE4 engines that will, on launch day, power the booster and this mission to begin to send a pair of NASA spacecraft manufactured by Rocket Lab on their way to the Red Planet. It appears we may be getting close to the start of the static fire itself, seeing the venting increase from the upper stage. We should see this taper off and stop ahead of the ignition or the ahead of the activation of the water suppression system. And there's the stop of the venting. Static fire should be in the next couple of minutes. Again, all of these times are approximate. We don't have a hard and fast timeline for this operation. And we have ignition, it appears. This might be the water deluge system, actually. And that looks like we've got the start of the test.
Yeah, I think so. I'm looking at the couple pictures that I did snap, and I thought with my eyes I saw, yeah, that looked like steam, so something might have ignited.
It certainly looked like we saw potentially an initial ignition of the 7BE4 engines and perhaps a very brief burn. Hard to say with great certainty.
That depends on how long they ask the range for permission to remain this test. So if, and honestly, I don't know the answer to what that window was that they had.
And we see a resumption of the vent from the upper stage once again. From what we could tell, it certainly appeared as though the water deluge system did activate, but the actual static fire may have been potentially aborted just as ignition was beginning. It's again hard to say with absolute certainty. For those of you who may just be joining us again, it does appear as though Blue Origin may have reached the point of ignition for the static fire tonight and then aborted the test just as it was beginning. Of course, this is a static fire test, and there wasn't a whole lot of information going into this operation, so we will hopefully hear something from the company in the next little bit, but that's also not a guarantee. Again, for those in the live chat, this was always designed to be just a static fire test. Tonight was never a launch attempt. Presumably at this point, Blue Origin will begin to save the vehicle and offload the propellant on board. Since the water deluge system was activated, it's not entirely clear how long Blue Origin would need for turnaround and another attempt for this static fire test. It would also depend on the reason for the apparent abort as to when they might be able to get back into the flow for another static fire attempt. want to show a quick replay of the what apparently was a aborted static fire attempt. You see the replay is running now. In a moment, we'll see the water deluge system activate. You can see it just beginning there. System kicks on about 10 seconds before the actual ignition. And it looks like that's the point where the BE7s come to life very briefly. And then all goes more quiet. Go ahead and we've re-racked the video. Let's watch this one more time. You can see this is prior to the launch. The venting on the upper stage has stopped. Watch for the activation right here of the water deluge system. And then the flare stack will shift. See that change at ignition? It does seem to be a good visual nod to the fact that they did in fact ignite the BE7 engines for a brief pocket of time and then aborted the test. Again, given the fact that the water suppression system was activated, we don't know exactly when Blue Origin may be able to come back and try again. Of course, it will also depend on the reason for the abort itself. We will, of course, continue to monitor the progress of Blue towards the launch of NASA's EscaPADE mission and let you know both when they are in a position to try again with this static fire test, as well as when a launch date is announced. We'll have that on our schedule at spaceflightnow.com, just under the live schedule tab. In the meantime, you can learn a little bit more about this mission through our video about it. It's up on the YouTube channel right now. If you just scroll down in the video section. just to recap where we are with things, we did see the water suppression system ignite. Let's go ahead and re-rack that video. Play that again for folks one more time. You can see the water suppression system kick on, and then the BE7, or excuse me, the 7 BE4 engines ignite for just a brief second. The flare stack for the methane on the booster really kicks up to indicate that, and then all goes quiet just moments after the initial ignition. So with the abort and apparently no further attempts going to be made tonight, best we can tell, we're going to go ahead and wrap things up with our live coverage tonight. But want to thank our moderators in the chat, to Astro Joe and to Rick Donner for helping us out this evening. Thanks as well to Cumulus Granatus for answering folks' questions in the live chat. I also want to thank our photographers, Adam and John, for being troopers and being ready to support the static fire attempt, we shall say, for tonight. Of course, we'll do our due diligence and let you know when, as best we can tell, Blue Origin will make another attempt at performing a static fire of its New Glenn rocket, and again, when they are in a position to launch NASA's EscaPADE mission. Big thanks to our Spaceflight Now editor, Stephen Young, for running the technical operations of tonight's broadcast. Thanks as well to our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images for being with us tonight. Most importantly, though, thanks to you for wherever you have been joining us. We certainly appreciate your time and attention, and we look forward to welcoming you back here tomorrow as we are set to cover SpaceX's Starlink 11-23 mission, with a liftoff no earlier than about 1:15 p.m. Pacific, about 1944 UTC. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others, and we will see you next time, folks. And until then, bye-bye.